As she trekked across the interminable sands, the only sound to accompany her heavy breathing was Nera's ancestral staff. Her previously immaculate golden attire, which was made for her homeworld's verdant woodlands, now clung to her blue skin, which was covered in a tiny layer of sand that appeared to get into each fold and crease. 3 days after she came out of the portal, confused and afraid, days after witnessing her country burn and her people being massacred by the ruthless Krivak army that had come without, she muttered to herself, "Keep moving," as a warning to her tranquil world. The twin boys of this singer, whose voice cracks with thirst, said, "Just keep moving." The constant beating of the desert wind once transformed the horizon into a glittering mirage, and Nera's silvery white hair with a strip taken from her. She tied most of her pride and joy back, leaving it hanging in matted strands about her face, sleeve, but a few stubborn hairs continued to whip across her field of vision with every wind gust that grew stronger. As she looked toward the western horizon, a stronger Nara stopped and planted her stick in the sand to regain her balance. A sandstorm unlike any other was approaching as the heart plummeted into a huge wall of spinning sand, none that she had seen before, not even in her people's ancient scriptures. Panic began to rise in her chest, but she didn't stop spinning around in desperation. In search of cover, the level dunes provided nothing but more sand in all directions. With the exception of a tiny squinting, she could just make out what seemed like a rock formation, maybe a quarter of a mile away in the black smudge to the north. Grasping her staff tightly, Nera started to run on her legs since it was her only hope. The wind picked up and pelted her bare flesh with burning sand as she struggled to push through it. The storm was advancing more quickly than she had expected, and the roar of it was intensifying as the small grains stung like needles. Louder as the rock formation approached, becoming more apparent as a ragged protrusion with several dark nooks that might serve as sanctuaries from the looming Nera. The storm's initial strong gusts nearly knocked her down as she screamed for relief and pushed her lungs harder. With a last surge of desperate energy, she got off her feet and jumped into the biggest hole she could find on the rocks. Could see how the small entryway grew into what looked like a tiny cave. As the storm roared outside, obfuscating the view, Nera fell to her hands and knees, gasping for air. With a wall of whirling sand at the entrance, she said, "Safe," giving herself a relief, for now. As Nera's breathing calmed down, became conscious of an odd flickering light farther inside. The she wasn't alone in the cave, which had the distinct smell of burning wood. Nera stood up, defensively gripping her staff, and proceeded gingerly deeper into the cave, where the passageway curved. They rotated the dancing light, which became more intense with every stride, creating odd shadows, played along the stone walls, and she froze a figure as she turned a last corner, sat next to a tiny fire, covered by a deep hooded, old, pale mantle. The figure, looking away from her, was motionless and the color of desert sand. Nera, who didn't seem to see her, paused and considered her alternatives during the storm. She was forced to take refuge here from the outside, but who or what was this enigmatic entity, a friend or an enemy? Before she could choose whether to make an announcement or withdraw, she may have been a refugee like herself or something more dangerous. Without turning, the figure said, "The storm brought you here." I assume the voice was deep and resonant, and it was definitely male. Until it passes, feel free to share my fire." Nara's hold on her staff grew tighter. I heard you breathing, and the figure turned slowly, raising his head before the hood dropped back. "Did you realize I was here?" Showing a face that made Nera's heart stop a little, soft brown eyes looked at her with serene interest. From a Matana's weathered face was not a species face that she recognized. It had no scales, fur, no bioluminescent marks, just burnished-looking skin. "You're human," she said, with copper-colored, odd, soft-looking hair covering the lower part of her face and over her eyes. Before she could stop them, he muttered, "And you know of my kind." The man's eyes widened a little. Nera stayed motionless as she pointed to the area across the fire and said, Please sit. The storm will last for hours yet. Everyone was aware that mind-racing humans had disappeared from the galaxy that left behind only legends and ruins thousands of years ago. Yet one sat alive here, breathing while looking at her through those oddly expressive eyes, saying, "Don't be scared," he said softly, his deep voice somehow reassuring despite her shock. "Won't hurt you." Nera warily believed him because of something in his tone and the faint grief that permeated his words. She walked up and took a seat across from him, keeping her employees close at hand. My name is Nera," she said, candidly examining him, now of the Alari people. As though testing the phrase, he said, "Alari," tilting his head slightly. "I've not heard of your kind before," he said. "Oh, I'm Daniel, the last person to survive the human research station on Earth." Nera, the final survivor, echoed, followed by others. Daniel's face was briefly obscured by a shadow, but now it is not there. As Nera took in the knowledge that a real, breathing human being was the source of the fire's crackling, the quiet between them, the ramifications were astounding. "You mentioned that you are aware of people," Daniel then asked. "How have we disappeared?" From the Nara paused for a long moment before concluding that the truth was, everyone knows that humans are a legendary species of fighters, therefore, it's her best option. Who opposed the Dominion, who overcame insurmountable obstacles, and who disappeared into legend. But you're meant to be extinct. Daniel smiled slightly, acknowledging that there have been reports of our extinction, heightened outside as the storm roared with fresh rage, but inside the cave, Nera sensed her world burned with hope as the storm raged, and then she felt the first hints of something she hadn't anticipated feeling again. Outside, Nera saw that she was increasingly fascinated by Daniel's looks. There was something oddly alluring about his extraterrestrial appearance. Look, including his warm brown eyes, strong jawline, short beard, and expressive facial expression. When he said, "Your world," Daniel broke the silence and continued, "Tell me what happened, Nera." Tightened her hold on her crew as recollections of the screams, burning, and ruthless effectiveness of when the attackers unexpectedly arrived. She spoke, her voice barely audible above the roaring wind of the KAC's ships. "Filled our skies like a locust plague." Daniel's body tensed at the cark, and his posture abruptly transformed. "You're positive, yes?" Nero said, startled by his response. "Six-limbed fighters with exoskeletons, such as burnished metal, employ energy weaponry of some sort, which Daniel finished for her with a harsh voice, but the memories were too terrible, and the organic stuff crumbled upon touch. Nera gazed at him, leaving just ash behind. "You know them. They're the cause," Daniel said coldly, "that humans are extinct because they almost killed us out 3,000 years ago." He shook his head in the end, despite our best efforts to fight back. "We who made it out alive went into deep hiding, but why would you attack your species? Why did Daniel get up and start pacing the cave's cramped space?" Kravak thought that any race with the capacity to challenge them was the only species deserving of evolution. As they are methodically removed, Nera experienced a chill that was unrelated to the cave's temperature. "But you had potential," Daniel paused to say. "My people were peaceful. We had no weapons, no defenses. Look at her. Your staff, Mayfi." "I?" Nera reluctantly gave Daniel her ancestral staff, which he studied with. "Remarkable," he whispered, as he ran his fingertips over the fine designs engraved on its surface. "It is a tool for concentrating psychic energy, isn't it? Your people are telepaths, are they not?" "How could you have known that?" Nera inquired in shock. Daniel chose to go to the back of the cave rather than respond. And, to Nera's surprise, a seam formed in the stone when he rubbed his palm against what seemed to be solid rock, expanding into a doorway that opened into a dimly lighted hallway beyond. "I believe there's more to this cave than meets the eye, Nara. Time I showed you the truth," he added, reaching out to her. His flesh was warmer than hers, so she hesitated just a moment before putting her blue hand in his. She followed him through the threshold onto a sloping corridor that sank deeply, feeling a sudden thrill up her arm. As they passed panels of softly shining light embedded in the desert, she questioned, "What is this place?" Daniel responded, "Outpost 7, one of the 23 human monitoring posts inside the fortifications. We have been waiting and observing, dispersed, throughout the galaxy, to gather information on the crave and other dangers." The hallway led to a huge room with more technology than the NRA had ever seen in a hologram. Displays displayed surveillance footage and data streams from star systems, from what seemed to be dozens of worlds. For Daniel went on, "We've stayed hidden, rebuilding our strength, for 3 millennia. Creating technology that might one day enable us to take back our position in the galaxy." He looked at her. Expression symmetry, and following centuries of dormancy, the Kabach are now active once more. Nera stepped closer to one of the displays, now recognized the beautiful vistas of her home, Earth, with a start. "We keep an eye on all worlds, and you were watching my planet, reduced to smoldering ruins." Daniel acknowledged that your people's psychic powers made you unique among species that exhibit particular promise. Curiosity, but the Kvak moved more quickly than we expected, so Nera went to him. "We had planned to get in touch eventually." Anger erupting, "You knew they might arrive, but you did nothing," Daniel expressed regret in his voice, saying that immediate action would have made our existence known. As soon as the Kvak discovered he moved closer, his eyes fierce, and they would have linked human technology to our secret colonies. "I really apologize, Nera, but if mankind is to endure, will we ever be resilient enough to beat them? We'll have to stay ghosts." The reasoning was chilly, but Nera couldn't deny that the idea of her people dying as people look on in horror still made some sense. "How are many of you present?" she inquired, shifting the topic to just me. Daniel's face hardened. As the sole survivor of an accident involving a containment breach in the power core, Nara experienced a wave of empathy. They both survived the disaster alone, and she didn't realize she had arrived. Daniel glanced down at her hand as she put it on his arm and apologized, then looked her in the eye, and something happened between them that might have been an acknowledgement of their mutual loss and loneliness. "You're the first person I've spoken to in almost 2 years, he remarked quietly as the room appeared to warm up. "And you're the first human I've ever met," she said abruptly, acutely conscious of their proximity. "I always believed your kind were only myths." A smile curved his lips, changing his face, reducing his weight and making him appear younger. "And what did the legend say about us?" "Because you were formidable fighters," Nera remarked, refusing to back down from smart creators, "that you battled and loved with equal fervor, but the truth is disappointing." There was a light-hearted note. Not to Daniel's dismay, Nera acknowledged, in his voice, that she felt a flush spread across her blue cheeks. His eyes shifted to her lips and then back to her eyes in a questioning manner. The storm, the monitoring station. When something fresh and surprising ignited between them, Kabak all seemed to disappear into the background. "I should indicate a place for you to rest," Daniel stated in a rougher tone than before. "The storm will continue through the night." "Yes," Nera concurred, but neither of them took any action right away. That would be prudent. Daniel guided Nera through a number of hallways, each of which was adorned with quiet, humming electronics. Efficiency, pointing out several areas of the building, including the Medical Bay Communication Center and the living quarters. He spoke with the smoothness of a tour guide, but his gaze kept coming back to her with such intensity that caused her skin to quiver. "And this," he said, pausing in front of a circular room with holographic screens, "is the lab for analysis." Attracted to a central platform, Nera entered and asked, "What do you analyze here, artifacts or technology?" Daniel's eyes landed on her staff, and I wondered whether there was anything that might assist us in comprehending our adversaries or possible allies. Gave it to him. When their fingers touched, an electric shock ran up her arm, and Daniel appeared to sense it via his breath. Pausing a little before gathering his thoughts, Nera remarked, "I've always wondered about this," as he sat. The employees on the platform have been there for decades, yet it's completely. Although we know that purpose enhances our innate abilities, it is still a mystery. Red lights pulsed along the ceiling as a shrill alarm sliced through the air, quickly hardening Daniel's countenance. He said, "Fingers," as he hurried to a nearby console proximity alarm. Something has entered the atmosphere holographically and is soaring over the controls. Screens appeared all around them, displaying the design of a tiny craft descending through the planet's upper atmosphere. She muttered, her blood running, making it obvious even to the Narration scout ship. Daniel's voice was tight. "It must have been cold that they followed your portal signature. Although the storm may have temporarily obscured your path, they are tenacious hunters. What should we do?" "Get ready, Daniel," turned on a second console. "Although this outpost has fortifications, they are meant to be concealed rather than to be used in direct combat. When they find us, the implied meaning is that they both knew what the Kravok had done to their." Daniel responded. "Enemies wait," abruptly turning back to her workers. Platform underneath it had started to emit light in the form of lines that traced the elaborate designs carved into the old, unexpected artifact. "What is it? Your staff?" Daniel's eyes widened as data raced across the closest panel while interacting. "With our systems, the technology is more than compatible. It reacts to our security measures as though it were made to be never moved." Observing more intently as the staff throbbed with inner light. "Wondering how I'm not sure." But Daniel's voice grew halting as he examined these symbols, which scroll information, resemble an old human writing, and the energy signature Before she could digest, he gazed up at her, wondering, "Nera, I believe our civilizations share a common ancestor," Daniel added coldly. This revelation caused the alarm to change pitch, becoming more urgent. "They've landed. The storm will slow them down about 3 miles away, but they will proceed methodically," and he went swiftly to another portion of the laboratory, extracting what appeared to be weaponry from a hidden compartment. "We must turn on." The Nera took a long breath and studied the outpost's complete defensive capabilities. "Your crew might be the key. She gives me instructions, and the staff appears to be reacting to your biorhythms. We might be able to uncover your telepathic powers, if you can direct your energy via it in the same way. Dormant features in our systems, and the staff." Nera nodded and reclaimed the staff, her fingers closing around it. As though the interaction with human technology had reawakened something inside of her, she experienced a familiar warmth that was greater now. The staff heated up as she closed her eyes and focused on directing the energy she had been taught since she was a young child. The facility systems reacted as her hands began to vibrate with power. Daniel gasped as he watched the screens flicker, with new information, lighting previously dark portions. "It's working," he said. The main panel displayed defense schematics, and Nera said, "You're unlocking protocols I didn't even know existed." When she opened her eyes, Daniel was looking at her with unmasked admiration, which was amazing. Their eyes were locked, and something changed between them at that precise instant as peril approached and ancient mysteries emerged all around them. Something more intense and primordial sprang from the attraction that had been smoldering beneath the surface. Daniel drew nearer, gently brushing a lock of white hair away from her face. "You're remarkable," he remarked. "So are you," Nera asked, leaning into his contact, her blue skin standing out against his tan fingers. The alarm went on. Rhythmic warning, but neither left. In this life-threatening situation, the connection could be hours away. "In my culture," Nero muttered, "we believe that souls are the most natural thing in the universe. Acknowledge one another throughout their lives and across species." "And what does your soul recognize in me?" Daniel said in a hoarse voice. "A warrior and a kindred spirit. Someone who is sensitive to loss." She put her free hand to his chest and felt Daniel's eyes clouded with fear, and his heart raced beneath her touch. "If these are our final hours together, let's make the most of them." Desire Negro completed for him. their lips locked in a kiss that lasted beyond the epoch of species. Gentle at first, but as millennia of separation between their sorts took away the intensity, while Nera's arms wrapped around Daniel's neck, drawing her closer to him, staff members slid unnoticed to the ground. Together, they made their way to the living quarters, their skin glowing unearthly from the red warning lights. For now, the impending threat just made their bond more intense, making every touch and kiss more urgent. Dawn discovered them intertwined, and each quiet breath felt like a defiant celebration of life in the face of extinction. Nura woke up to the sight of a tangle of blue and copper limbs in each other's arms against the stark white of Daniel's sleeping quarters, temporarily confused by the strange environment before recollections of the night returned, and she looked in wonder at Daniel's sleeping face. The lines of stress were momentarily smoothed away by his serene appearance. The contrasts in their physiologies had resulted in moments of revelation during the night. Despite changing over time, they had discovered their groove together through awkward humor and whispered direction. Some aspects were genuinely ubiquitous among realms, such as the persistent beeping of a Daniel's eyes, jerked wide as soon as the monitor yanked her from her rest, alerting the scouts. "Well," he muttered, sitting up. Nair responded, grabbing for her golden clothing. "How long was I asleep?" The alarm tone changed, and Daniel was, they're already at a terminal, accessing surveillance data. The storm has subsided sufficiently for them to come closer. He looked at her to make progress, and his face conveyed that they needed to dress effectively and move fast. As Daniel escorted Anera back to the command center, the intimacy of the night gave way to the necessity of survival. Couldn't help but observe how their relationship had changed. They were now more at ease with one another. As they approached the main area, Daniel admitted, "I have a plan," adding, "2 plans actually," as he turned on 6 red dots move steadily toward their location. First we see on the holographic display of the surrounding desert. Before the scouts could report our position, he used the outpost defensive systems to kill them. Display emphasizing several locations throughout the building, your employees' automated dormant security procedures. He pointed to a narrow passageway and said, "If we can lure the crave into this valley, we can place weapon emplacements buried beneath the sand. We can start a crossfire between the dunes, and they won't be able to get away." Nera observed the tactical demonstration, and if it doesn't work, Daniel's expression will turn gloomy. Plan 2 is when he changed the screen to reveal a new area of the building, a hangar bay with a streamlined ship that was unlike anything Nera had ever seen before, the Pathfinder. Daniel described "You're saying we have a long-range, stealthy scout ship that can travel interplanetary distances despite its diminutive size." Run NRA stated, if required, as a factual statement rather than an accusation. Daniel, recognizing that the outpost's self-destruction would guarantee the Kavak would find nothing useful here, we could arrive at a human settlement. Within 3 days, Nera's fingertips followed the ship's outline on the screen in the Archie Cygnus sector, leaving any Daniel's eyes met hers on the Kravak trail, and he understood her worry. "I believe that the Pathfinder does not always carry cutting-edge communication equipment. We could notify possible targets to leave before the Kravak come, as my world ought to do." Nera responded, "You have been warned." Daniel took her hand and touched it gently. "I cannot undo what has happened to your people, Nera, but I can assist you in keeping others from experiencing the same thing." In the short time they had known one another, the honesty in his words had a profound effect on her, more empathy and understanding from a race of renowned warriors than she had previously believed possible. "So, let's try." The Daniel nodded with a vicious smile crossing his lips. "Trap them first," she determined. "Because of what they did to my world, I want to hurt them." Daniel programmed the rifle in his face, and I was hoping you would say that they spent the next hour getting ready. Placements as Nera created a fake energy signature with her staff to entice the Kabak to the trap. Working. They worked surprisingly well together, anticipating one another's requirements without having to. As Nera adjusted her staff on my world, she continued, "As you know, there's the idea that 2 souls temporarily link and become more aware of one another. when they physically combine. Daniel looked up from his console with a light-hearted expression. Is that why I can practically tell what you're thinking? Maybe she smiled in response. Or, speaking of commonalities, Daniel mentioned that humans and Alari might be more alike than either of us understood. I wanted to ask him something last. Night, when we stopped looking for Nair, was amused by his sudden embarrassment when we mated. So yep, that Daniel cleared his throat. You spoke about a custom in your culture that involves binding stars. Nera's cheeks warmed up. It is an eerie custom for two stars to bind together with a deeper blue flush. People execute a ritual under the stars to symbolically unite after choosing one another as their life companions. You muttered those words during our Daniel gesture, which was hazy, and their vital forces were like stars in a constellation. Nera acknowledged that it was automatic and that we frequently use religious expressions when we are feeling very strongly. Daniel softened his attitude and said, I liked it. It was lovely. Daniel's focus returned to the screen when an alert from the console sounded before Nera could react. When he said, "They're entering the valley or not," his voice became tense again. Nera took her place at the secondary console with the staff in hand and said, "It's time." They observed 6 Kravak scouts moving through the tight passageway in their armored vehicles via the surveillance stream. Nero was all too familiar with the armaments carried by the exoskeletons that glinted in the morning sun. Daniel answered, "Fingers," referring to the disintegration guns that had reduced her people to ash. With her staff in position above the activation sequence 321, she began to channel energy, producing an enticing pulse that resembled a potent energy source for the Daniel and Kravak simultaneously activated the hidden weapon, causing the valley to erupt in a well-coordinated bombardment. Powerful energy blasts. 5 of the Kravak scouts caught in the crossfire fell instantly before they could respond. The 6th managed to dive behind the others, despite their armored bodies crumpling under the precision hits. They observed a rock structure as it turned on a communication device on its arm and began transmitting Daniel. As he tried to jam the signal, his fingers flew across the console, but it was too late, and the message reached their eyes. Knew what this meant and how long it had been since they met across the command center. Hours may pass before reinforcements come, but Daniel's resolute expression, such as starting a self-destruct sequence, Daniel, since we're going with Plan 2 after all. His fingers flew over the control panel as he gave the order, enabling Phoenix 7. When the Delta 9 self-destruct procedure started, his computer reacted to the outpost. 15 minutes before the explosion, Nara collected the few items they would require for their emergency rations. Daniel nodded, tossing a medical supply, and most importantly, her staff. The hangar is 3 floors down. Checking the energy pistol at his hip and carrying the bag over his shoulder, we'll use the maintenance shaft since it's quicker than the main quarters. They travel quickly through the building as the disaster countdown begins. The Pathfinder, who awaited them with their ticket to safety and their opportunity to warn others, added urgency to their steps. Regarding the Kvak threat, did you hear Nera abruptly stop tilting her head? Something made Daniel stop and listen carefully as a slight scraping sound reverberated along the hallway, metal against metal. He drew his weapon slowly and deliberately, whispering that it must have lived and made its way into Nera. Tightened. Her hold on her staff, seeing the energy flowing through it as her adrenaline level rose, and how the outside maintenance ducts with locked doors are most likely the ones we're going to Daniel's face darkened. These issues are enduring, and now they stand between us and our escape path. Pushed against the wall and moved slowly in the direction of the intersection where the sound had come from, Daniel. He indicated that Nera should remain behind him, but she stepped to his side instead, saying, "I'm not helpless." Daniel's lips quirked into a little smile as she muttered a fierce resolve in her eyes. As they got closer to the intersection, Daniel looked around the area, and I could see that the scraping was getting louder. Corner, then swiftly withdrew. He admitted that he was hurt, but still hazardous and right on our route to the hangar's self-destruction in 12. When the computer announced the minutes, Nera quietly took a long breath and centered herself. I have a concept for my staff. When I channel energy, as she had been instructed, I can use it to produce a pulse that could confuse it long enough for us to attack Daniel. Taking this KVA into consideration, particularly for identifying energy signatures, sensory systems are highly developed. A rapid spike could overload them. For a brief moment, Nera closed her eyes and concentrated her energy before the staff started. On my signal, she would radiate an inner light that pulsed in time with her heartbeat. Daniel prepared his weapon as we moved, his body tensed like a coiling spring. For a second, their eyes locked, a silent recognition of the threat, and perhaps more in the brief time they'd known one another. They had developed a bond that went beyond their disparate backgrounds. Now, thrust her staff forward, delivering. A dazzling burst of vitality around the bend in a high pitch. The plan had succeeded, as evidenced by the screech. As they turned the corner, they saw the Crabak scout flailing its sensory. Even though the appendages were retreating in pain, the armored one was lethal. Without hesitation, Nera's limbs swung wildly, smacking Daniel across the chest and sending him tumbling against the wall. Struck the creature's primary nerve cluster with her staff, a weakness she had discovered during the Crabag stumble during the invasion of her realm. But Daniel swiftly recovered and fired his energy. The beast tripped after firing a pistol at the scout's injured leg joint, allowing Nera to retaliate with her staff. The Crabak made a green gurgling noise, this time aiming for the breathing mechanism at the base of its neck. With unexpected speed, it sprang for Nera while its metal claws were outstretched, spilling fluid from the damaged respirator. She ducked, but not quickly enough, and one claw tore through her shoulder. Daniel yelled in rage and threw himself at the creature, while she was wearing a golden dress and drawing a line of iridescent blue blood. With heedless abandon, they fell to the ground in a mass of arms and aliens. Nera marveled as Daniel battled, with a ferocity she hadn't anticipated from his typically. With a composed manner, she pointed out the neck joint, identifying a gap in the Crabak's armor where her previous blow had been. Daniel quickly shoved his weapon into the open hole after releasing a plate and discharged the Crabak, convulsed once and then stopped, reminding them that Daniel Rose will self-destruct in 8 minutes, the computer said. He stood up shakily, breathing heavily, and his gaze instantly flew to Nera's injured shoulder, saying, "You're hurt." "Superficial," she reassured him, despite the intense pain. "We must move." As they descended to the hangar level, they sped toward the maintenance shaft and avoided the fallen crevasse. Nera was astounded by what she had just seen, saying, "You fought in a different way than I anticipated." Daniel gave her a quizzical gaze as they arrived at the bottom, saying, "The stories talk about humans," as Nera explained. "Technical fighters employ plans and technology, but you battled with such fervor and unadulterated emotion. Arise." Daniel grinned and said, "Humans are complex beings who can be strategic and logical, cultured, but when he threatens someone we love, something more primordial takes control," and his eyes remain on her wounds. Shoulder, "I was no longer thinking strategically when I saw it hurt you." In spite of the risk and the countdown to the event, the connotation of his words made Nera's heart skip a beat. As the clock struck destruction, she experienced a wave of emotion that briefly overcame her. "In my culture," she added, "Daniel believes that the best way to show devotion is to gently protect your partner. Is that what we are, mates, after last night, Nera?" Our eyes darkened with an intensity that had nothing to do with fighting. In response, her cheeks began to turn a deeper blue. "What would you have named that before what just happened?" Daniel could respond. When they arrived at the hangar doors, the Pathfinder's streamlined figure awaited them beyond their reach. Additionally, the computer declared that they would self-destruct in 5 minutes, so Will Daniel vowed to continue this conversation once we're safely away, his hand resting on hers for a brief minute before he. When they turned to face the access panel, the doors slid open to reveal the Pathfinder standing between them in all its splendor. 2 additional Crabak scouts have their rifles raised and ready in the ship. "Stay put." Before the Krabak could see them, Daniel muttered, dragging Nera away from the doorway while his thoughts raced with potential solutions. In 4 minutes and 30 seconds, Nara's eyes watched as the self-destruct countdown resumed its ruthless progression. Were broad, but they decided what to do, so Daniel looked around the doorway's edge to gauge the two. The Pathfinder sat with the Krabak scouts standing watch, their weapons trained on the hangar entrance, obviously anticipating company. Its sleek hull, shining under the hangar lights, is tantalizingly close. Daniel remarked in a low, hurried voice, "There's something I didn't explain about this hangar," adding, Emergency Defense Nera looked up at the automated turrets that the original designers had developed using protocols hidden in the ceiling. However, I didn't see any weapons. They were retracted and could only be activated from their control panel. He gestured toward a console close to the Pathfinder's boarding ramp on the opposite side of the hangar. I'm able to go there, activate the defenses, and get out of our way. That's at least 30 meters of open space, Nera said. Saw, they'll spot you immediately. Not if they're distracted. Daniel's gaze landed on her staff. Can you create another energy pulse, but this time it's large enough to catch their notice? Nera nodded and tightened her grasp on her staff as I ran for the panel. Do better than that. In my reality, these are used for purposes other than enhancing psychic abilities to observe. She shut her eyes and focused intently, and the personnel started to glow with a strong blue light that pulsed brighter and quicker until it appeared to vibrate quickly in her hand. She pushed it through the opening, causing the bolt to strike the hangar with a dazzling arc of electricity. Both Kravak and the distant wall erupting in a brilliant show of light and music swirled in the direction of the disturbance, briefly shifting their focus to the nearby. With a hiss, Daniel ran into the hangar, staying low and hiding between cargo crates. The Kavak realized the energy bolts sizzled past him as Deceit started firing indiscriminately in his way. In 3 minutes, Nera stepped, causing the walls and floor around him to burn and self-destruct. The staff lifted and fired another energy bolt into the entryway, this time aiming it straight at one of the scouts. It hit the second Kabak turned its weapon toward her, turning the creature's shoulder around with the force of impact. As the disintegration fire passed, Daniel yelled, "Nera, down!" And she jumped to the ground. The near miss gave her a panic attack, but it was close enough overhead that she could feel the heat on her back. Additionally, there was a certain thrill to fighting with Daniel that seemed appropriate in some way, as though they had been companions for Daniel arrived at the control panel in years instead of hours, and he slapped his palm against the emergency scanner. Phoenix 7, Delta 9, the sealing protocol, Alpha authorization. The sleek, lethal turrets that swiveled toward the Krabak scouts were revealed by panels above the hangar that slid open before. Clear, Daniel said as the automated weapons fired, destroying the aliens in a precise assault before they could respond. Preparing the Pathfinder for launch with a Nera run. Already working the panel, Daniel met her halfway as she ran across the hangar as the spacecraft's boarding ramp descended. Snatching her hand and dragging her in the direction of their escape self-destruction, they sped up the slope into the interior of the Pathfinder is a small but functional area with 2 pilot seats. Daniel assumed the pilot's place right, away, his fingers dancing in what looked like a medical bay and a tiny living space. As the ship's engines buzzed to life, he said, "Strap in," guiding the controls with experienced ease. "This is going to be near." Nara sat down in the co-pilot's seat and watched with interest as Daniel worked. Something it was captivating to watch him in his environment, concentrated and confident, moving with precise and economical hangar doors. He announced, opening the enormous doors above and flipping a number of switches in preparation for an emergency launch sequence. They instantly started to slide apart, exposing the desert sky beyond the sand. In 1 minute, the storm's leftovers were still, spinning above self-destruct, pouring in around the edges. Daniel directed Pathfinder toward the opening hold after it ascended smoothly from the hangar floor and hovered for a while. Nera was pushed back by the force of the ship's upward acceleration. With only a few seconds remaining, they pushed through the hangar doors and onto her seat, then emerged into the desert's intense sunlight. Through the view screen that Nera could see, World Daniel made a strong bank to put distance between them and the outpost. As they descended deeper into the atmosphere, the barren scenery vanished and they self-destructed in 10, 9, 8. Brace for shockwave. Daniel alerted him to the explosion, keeping his hands steady on the controls. 3, 2, 1. A sphere of dazzling light grew outward from where the outpost was, blooming beneath them like a terrible flower. As the shockwave struck, the Pathfinder trembled, but Daniel's knowledgeable Daniel engaged the piloting to keep them steady, and Nera let go of a breath she didn't know she was holding. Autopilot, and turned to her, a sigh of relief spreading across his face as we did. Without thinking, Nera grabbed for him with her blue eyes, while the rush of their escape continued to flow through them both. The simple act of his fingers, entwining with his brown ones, appeared to finish a circuit between them in the previous hour's tension, changing into something completely different. "You're bleeding." Observing new blood on her shoulder where the cut had reopened during their journey, Daniel remarked softly. Again. She reassured him, "It's nothing," but he was already getting up from a chair. "Come on, there's a medbay. Let me take care of prior to determining our line of action." Daniel calmly used antiseptic to clean her wound, and his kind touch stood in sharp contrast to the as Nera watched, a powerful warrior who had battled the Kravak with such primordial ferocity, his face while working, captivated by the way. Emotions played out across his features. "What?" he inquired, observing her eyes. "I'm attempting to make sense of the disparate aspects of you," she acknowledged. The lone survivor, the accomplished pilot, the fierce protector. The softening of her voice caused Daniel's hands to pause in their as one of our poets, his eyes meeting hers. "Humans have multitudes." Stated that humans are complex beings, and I'm starting to see that Nera reached up to trace the line of his jaw and touch his face. And I find that I enjoy each version of you I've found thus far. The tiny space of the medbay appeared to warm up as they looked at one another. Around them, a spacecraft hummed, transporting them safely out of harm's path and into an exciting but uncertain future. Where to Daniel answered, "We have options," as he finished applying the bandage to Nera. "Now?" she asked, her voice scarcely audible above a whisper. "Shoulder. We might set a route to the closest human settlement, which is 3 days away, or intercept the Krabak fleet in an attempt to alert their next targets. Daniel, what would you pick? Both routes have merit for a while, and the colony would accept you humans. Valuable allies who are aware of the Kravak threat yet caution others about its expression. We were convinced that this is what people were supposed to do in order to safeguard standing against the darkness." Nera grinned, overcome with a wave of respect for this man and the species he stood for. "Together, let's alert the others, and then locate your folks." The word hung between them. Nera sat cross-legged on the Pathfinder as it soared across the star-streaked emptiness, full of promise and opportunity. Her ancestral staff balanced on her knees as she recounted the events of the previous days on the floor of the ship's little common area. This left her very little time to engage in a daily ritual that her people practiced to properly converse with the ancient item. "Keep their ties to their roots," Daniel observed from the doorway, mesmerized by the gentle blue radiance coming from Nera and the employees. Her eyes closed, her breathing labored. "You're staring," she murmured, measuring her silvery hair that seemed to be floating slightly like it was suspended in water. Daniel said, "It's hard not to," as she entered the room with her eyes open and a smile at the corners of her mouth. "You're quite a sight," Nera said as she opened her eyes and came back to full consciousness, the brightness dimming. Daniel questioned whether I should apologize, because it's considered very intimate in my culture to see someone during their communion. Not even sitting next to her, she leaned in and touched his shoulder. "I appreciate your attention," but the moment was cut short when the cockpit beeped urgently, and they exchanged. Before rushing to look at a transmission, Daniel described sliding into the pilot's seat with worried looks. then using a holographic projection to activate the communication system from the human settlement. A stern-faced man with silver-streaked hair in the stance of someone flared to life above the console. Previously in charge of Outpost 7, this is Admiral Reeves from New Terra Colony. You identified yourself right away after detecting your launch signature, Admiral Daniel replied. Instinctively straightening, Daniel Clark is the only Outpost 7 survivor. The Admiral's gaze tightened when I left the station after Kvak contact and am currently traveling with an ally. After all this time, Kravok's eyes turned to the NRA with skepticism and interest. His expression is battling, and the NRA of the ally she presented is your ally. She is moving forward because the Krivak recently devastated my world, escaped via a vortex that transported me to the Alari, Daniel's planet, and the Admiral's face transformed into one of, well, we've been keeping an eye on your species, and your psychic powers are quite amazing, Daniel. We have grounds to think that the Krivak may have followed Nero's portal signature if he interrupted his speaking urgently. After examining the energy pattern, they were able to link it to New Terra. The Admiral concluded somberly that our senses had already. She had a chilling sense of foreboding as she saw a Kravak fighting force altering their path toward our anticipated arrival in 36 hours. Settle in her stomach. More lives are in danger as a result of her escape, and we're heading straight for New Horror right now. Daniel acknowledged that the Pathfinder is fast. We can be there in 20 hours to help with preparations. Launching. Defenses now, but the interference-filled transmission outweighed any help the Admiral could provide. Picture turned to static and said, "Signal lost." Daniel said they were already charting their new route, so the Kvak must be while working. In that sector, jamming communications, Nera experienced an odd vibration. It had started to pulsate from her staff, with an inner glow more powerful than she'd never previously did. Daniel noticed that the staff rose from the spot where she had placed it. The console appeared to be a star as light flowed from its complex, designs as it was hovering in mid-air. Charts into the ship's view screen. Daniel inquired, "What's going on?" I was astounded. "I'm not sure, but it's never been done this way before." Nara warily approached the floating staff. The ship's systems must. Daniel looked at the anticipated star chart and saw that these locations were familiar, although they haven't. When Nara tapped a staff member in our typical navigation database, a plethora of images instantly flooded her head. An enormously powerful weapon, two races, and ancient structures on a far-off planet collaborating to make it human and allergy-friendly. She gasped and was pulled by the forge. I regarded it as a weapon made by our forefathers. Daniel, something that could overcome the Kravak, where we could approach a system close to Nutra. I was guided to you because of the colony Nera's hopeful gaze. We were destined to discover this weapon together, having survived while my world failed. Daniel merely hesitated for a moment before changing their direction. If there's even a possibility, we must attempt the trip to the enigmatic coordinates was a haze of planning and intimate contact with the potential for. In the peaceful moments, Daniel and Nera found themselves pulled to each other as they faced the Kvak fleet that loomed ahead. On their last night before arriving at the coordinates, they were caught up in the midst of training and preparation. The gentle buzz of the engines surrounds them in the ship's tiny sleeping quarters, providing a private haven if tomorrow goes. I want you to know that finding you was worth everything I lost, Nera said desperately into Daniel's chest, arms clenched around her. Human beings say that fortune favors the bold. The Alari have. Nero responded with a similar grimace, sketching designs on his skin. We say those who they must follow their hearts in order to dance with destiny. What does your heart tell you? Now, Daniel asked in a hoarse voice in the low light, and Nero stood up. To see in his eyes that the cosmos placed us here by more than chance. Their bodies discovered that they were meant to be together, and their lips met in a kiss that spoke of possibilities and promises. In the midst of uncertainty, they found courage and comfort in their perfect harmony in each other's embrace, connection, a tie that went beyond their disparate backgrounds. That morning discovered them nearing a little The staff's image of an ordinary planetoid circling a fading star led them to. As they entered orbit, Daniel remarked in confusion, "There's nothing there," referring to a specific spot on the desolate surface. "My people's structures have no energy signatures, so trust the staff," Nera suggested. They landed close to the coordinates, donned environmental suits, and then ventured into the airless. As they got closer to a featureless, expansive rock, Nera's staff began to pulse more intensely. "Here," she said, firmly placing the staff on the ground as soon as it touched the surface below them. The rock developed trembling fissures that extended outward in geometric patterns similar to those on the staff with a "after you," Daniel uttered. The ground split open to reveal a staircase descending into darkness. The stairway led to a large room, and he smiled as he turned on the light on his outfit, packed with technology beyond anything they have ever seen. A flawless fusion of Aleri psychic and human intellect engineering, a gadget that looked like a huge replica of Nera's Nero murmured to the personnel, who were encircled by control consoles, the Harmony Spear, name returning to her as though from ancestors' memories, which disturbs their hive mind but does not kill the Kavak, making it impossible for them to coordinate non-lethal. Daniel observed with, "Thankfully, our forefathers were more understanding than I may have been, and they made quick progress in comprehending the ancient weapon, Daniel's technological expertise, and Nera's psychic powers work in perfect harmony. By when New Terra sent them an urgent message announcing the Kavak fleet's early arrival, when they arrived, the combat above New Terra was already in full swing thanks to the Harmony Spear stowed aboard the Pathfinder. Despite being more advanced, the Kavak warships outnumbered the human ships 3-1, and the Colonies' orbital defenses were. When the Pathfinder failed, Daniel stated, "We need to get within range of their command ship," as he navigated the "Can you spot the mayhem of battle?" Nera touched the Harmony Spear that was now attached to the ship. She pointed to a huge ship near the fleet center and said, "Systems there." Daniel maneuvered with dexterity that came from years of training, as commands flowed from it. Nera nodded as they approached their destination while dodging Krabak fire, directing her energies toward our people's old weapon. When the Harmony Spear came into action, it sent a surge of energy that briefly engulfed the Krabak fleet, appeared to occur, and then the enemy spacecraft started to drift one by one, their synchronized attack patterns disintegrating. Daniel yelled, "It worked!" As the human fleet swiftly gained the upper hand around the hours later. The confused Krabak ships were in the command center of New Terra when Admiral Reeves spoke to their commanders. Their ships were taken intact. Their troops were rendered innocuous, and the Krabak threat had been eliminated. "Today marks a new chapter in human history," the Admiral declared, "without a single death for 3 millennia. We have been strengthening ourselves in the shadows, and today we are returning to the light." His eyes landed on Daniel and Nera. "Stand side by side, and we do so with the IRI and other new partners by our sides." Later, as our forefathers had intended, humanity came together once more while standing on a balcony with a view of New Terra's capital city, a centuries-old miracle of human tenacity and resourcefulness. Nero rested against Daniel's as she watched. The 2 moons rise over the horizon, she wondered. What happens now? We rebuilt and warned others. Daniel turned to face her, taking her as we look for further Ari survivors throughout the Kravak worlds. Hands in his, and we work together. Nera concurred, revealing her blue complexion, glowing in the moonlight. And I enjoy the way Daniel grinned and drew her nearer. "As you remember when you first, I slipped into my cave while fleeing the Sandstorm, and I had no idea where it would take me or where it had taken me, narrator." Daniel responded, sealing the deal, even though she already knew the answer to the question of precisely where we were supposed to be. "Promise while kissing."